The happy event was marred only by discovery that of all the thousands of pieces of luggage that Canadian National handled, they had to damage one of ours. Luckily, none of the contents were lost, and Canadian National replaced our damaged case within a few weeks. We found our way off the docks. Why do they always make them like a maze? The coffee shop we called in during a break in the incessant conversation gave us our first encounter with the do-it-yourself drink system. We were given plastic cups, packets of white and brown sugar, containers of milk and cream, not forgetting the stir sticks. After filling the cups and adding the various ingredients, I looked at the mess on the table. It looked like a family of 5 had been there for a week. Excellent coffee, though. The drive back to Ottawa was fantastic. The French influence in the province of Quebec was very obvious. Couldn't read the signs, but then again I didn't need to. Joe was driving. It is a beautiful province, and we conclude later that it is such a shame there is still so much acrimony regarding separation from the rest of Canada. We crossed into the province of Ontario. The scenery didn't change, but all the signs were now in English. When we arrived in the city of Ottawa, we couldn't believe the magnificence of the buildings, and in particular, the whole area of Parliament Hill and the adjacent Chateau Laurier. What did strike us both was the cleanliness of the Canada that we've seen so far. It was unbelievable, not one piece of litter. However, our admiration for the place was soon brought down a peg or two when we came face to face with armed soldiers parading through the streets of Canada's capital. I remember thinking, what the hell had we come to? I'm not going to attempt the spelling of this French liberation group known as the FLQ, but we were informed that they had kidnapped an English diplomat called James Cross, along with Monsieur Pierre Laporte. This was our first encounter with Quebec's ongoing battle to separate from Canada. It may be sick humor, but you know the English. The first letters received from home all asked us to give us our diplomat back. The fortunate James Cross was later released, but sadly, Monsieur Laporte was executed by his captors. We wended our way through the streets of Ottawa, and both Rita and I were impressed by the size and architectural magnificence of the many high-rise buildings. It was for only half an hour or so, but the width of the streets and the apparent courteousness of the other drivers made our journey quite memorable. On arrival at Joe's house, his wife May gave us a great welcome and immediately produced a meal fit for a king. Their children were too young to understand what was going on, but they shared the moment as best they could. Reminiscing was the main theme for the next 2 weeks. There was a lot to catch up on. Rita and Joe were 2 of 11 children. To this day, I still hear new family stories. What does get told quite often is the one about there only being 1 pair of knickers to share between 5 sisters. The first one to get dressed got to wear them. Joe was kind enough to loan me his American Motors Rambler. This is not considered a large car by American standards, but to me, it was huge. Off we went to a local shopping mall. We found the stores to be clean and stocked with inexpensive merchandise compared to the UK. Another pleasant discovery was the politeness of the very helpful sales clerks. Have a nice day may not be considered by some to be a sincere comment, but it beats the hell out of a blank look when you've spent money in the store. Whilst cleaning my spectacles in a store, my lenses fell out and hit the marble floor. Needless to say, it broke. Can you visualize me driving back home one-eyed in a monster of a car on the right side of the road? It was horrendous, but we got home safe. Incidentally, I subsequently requested another lens from my optician in England. He sent me the wrong one! However, this was rectified, and my sight was restored. After an enjoyable visit with Joe and family, we traveled by train down to Hamilton to see my uncle. To avoid upsetting any of his living relatives that were forced to like him, I will be brief about this time in my life. What a different welcome. The first thing he criticized was the fact that we had gone to Ottawa first instead of going directly to his place. He continued criticizing and being a pain in the ass for the rest of his life. The bastard. I'm getting annoyed now just thinking about it, so I'll move on as fast as I can. We stayed with him and his wife for 2 weeks and then rented our own apartment. However, we made the mistake of getting one in the same building. He was possessive to a fault and continued to interfere at every opportunity in our lives. We had no time to ourselves, and we innocently followed his advice, which didn't do us any good whatsoever. I'm convinced that he was jealous of our youth and vitality and went out of his way to prove that he still had it. But this was a different world to the one that enabled him to make his fortune. We had to adapt to a new life in our own way, and this didn't go over too well. Before we could even look for employment, we had to obtain the appropriate documents from the Canadian authorities. The visit to the immigration office in Hamilton was no picnic. Hundreds of questions, most of which posed no problem, until we came to the marital status. Uncle Albert had told us that Canada recognized common law relationships. So when asked if we were married, we simply answered yes and didn't go into details. Our names were the same, so the official didn't question our response. The next step was to have a medical examination. Apparently, it usually took a couple of weeks before we could see the doctor in Hamilton. Being impatient, I inquired if a medical could be had any quicker. The fellow informed me that if we were willing to travel the 40 or so miles to Toronto, we could see the doctor at the airport. We boarded the airport bus and arrived at the clinic about an hour later. The examination was no problem, except for him failing to hit my vein when he tried to take a blood sample. I was surprised when he said that I looked a little gray and he would not try again, as Rita's sample would serve his purpose. Strange, but I didn't argue. We were granted landed immigrant status 18th November. We had achieved our objective, but little did we know at that time. We would be hit with another bombshell later. December 25th, 1970, brought fantastic news from England. My brother Ian and his wife Dorothy were blessed with a healthy baby boy whom they named Paul. We sent all the usual gifts, but the most significant was a silver spoon with appropriate instructions. Paul would be the first member of our family to be born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Sadly, it would be about 2 long years before we could hug the lad and personally welcome him to our family. Incidentally, the wages in Canada were much higher than in England at that time, and I had a theory that if we could earn more but maintain a standard of living similar to back home, the extra money could be saved. Therefore, I suggested we buy a small car instead of a large North American gas guzzler. Surprise, surprise, I saw a used Pontiac Laurentian advertised at what I was told to be a bargain price. I revamped my thoughts and rationalized that petrol was cheaper here, so it was okay to splurge this time. We drove around like Lord and Lady Muck. An incident on our first New Year's Eve interrupted the enjoyment of our new vehicle. Uncle Albert had insisted that we join him at a party that night at the Masonic Lodge. That afternoon, Rita and I went shopping on Hamilton Mountain. The locals call it that, but it's just a large hill with thousands of houses and shops on the plateau at the top. It had been snowing, on and off, since we arrived in Hamilton, and by now the sides of the roads were piled high with snow thrown by the snowplows. We were on our way home when a car pulled out in front of us, and I quickly but gently pumped the brake pedal and skidded. I managed to avoid the idiot, but slid off the road onto one of the roadside piles. It was scary but funny to see the car with all 4 wheels off the ground and balancing perfectly on the top of this frozen bank of dirty snow. We caught our breath and climbed down. Amused, but helpful, residents rushed out to see if we were okay, and one even chased the other car to no avail. After enjoying a cup of coffee and a good giggle with these thoughtful people, we returned late to the apartment. "Where the hell have you two been?" screamed my least favorite uncle. "I'll leave it to your imagination what I told him to do." We spent our first and definitely last New Year's Eve at a Masonic Lodge in Canada, none of which serve alcoholic drinks. A disappointing end to a lousy, but rather funny day. As we were now legal residents of our new country, we could officially seek employment. The problem was that just about all tradesmen in Canada require a license. To obtain this, the relevant certificates have to be produced. It was difficult enough in England, so I concluded that it would probably be almost impossible to secure a job in my particular field of expertise. But, probably like you, I can't for the life of me think what the hell this was by now. I decided to forget the technical side and resume my salesman's career, and got a job with Metropolitan Life Insurance Co. I don't want to hear any derogatory jokes like, "Insurance is like a condom. It gives you a feeling of warmth and security while you are being screwed." The interview and exam were fun. They talked about nickels and dimes, and I didn't know what the hell they were, but I got by with a laugh. My uncle used to work for this company, and this was another source of friction between us. I ended up being far more successful than he, and it didn't go down too well. On top of that, many of his former coworkers were still around, and they cringed when I mentioned his name. Would you believe that he wasn't well liked? So I had another hiccup to overcome. Anyway, I persevered and made a real good living for the next 6 years. My territory was Stony Creek, a village with a population of about 7,000. It was a clean, well-serviced place, and the people were very friendly, so we eventually moved there. Our apartment was on the top floor at the end and was the width of the building. With the stairwell being on the other side, it was just like a two-bedroom detached bungalow. Living in the same building was a young man named Sean O'Sullivan, not the boxer. This bright fellow had just been elected as a member of the federal parliament and was the youngest member ever to be elected. Someone told us later that he was the prodigy of Michael Diefenbaker, a distinguished ex-Prime Minister of Canada. I can't say we became close friends, but we did have a good few philosophical chats now and then. We exchanged Christmas cards for many years. Sean, rather surprisingly, gave up politics and entered the priesthood. The last we heard was that he went to study in Rome, and unfortunately, we lost touch. My associates at Metropolitan Life, wearing wide ties with nudes painted on, were fun-loving and super salespeople. I'm joking about the ties, but you get the picture. Although Canadian, they were quite Americanized and very confident. The majority of people on this side of the Atlantic are proud of their heritage and enjoy a relatively good standard of living, and do not hesitate to talk about both. That doesn't always go over too well with the Brits. We've all heard the somewhat derogatory remarks, but in reality, I believe that an Englishman is just like an American, but with the volume turned down. In case somebody has taken offense, I would hasten to add, from many years' experience, that the vast majority of North Americans are friendly, generous, and fun-loving people who tend to live life to the full. I must say, however, that they do realize their dubious reputation and actually have a name for the people that are to blame for this as ugly Americans. I do go on, don't I? Staying with this racial thing, some Canadians refer to the Brits as chirpers. Needless to say, this was applied to me, and unlike the Yanks, I got fed up with it. After a couple of months, I started to enter the office singing, "Oh, the big fat chirper comes bobbing along," to the tune of, "Oh, the red robin." They dropped the nickname. I can't get away from this theme. My favorite restaurant in the village was owned by a Greek. He was telling me that when he first got married, his wife thought he was a Greek god. Now, she refers to him as a goddamned Greek. We made some real good friends during this 6-year period and have visited them often over the years. Hi, y'all. If you are wondering what Rita was doing while I was working my fingers to the bone, she was keeping really busy. In England, she worked in a home for teenage girls in care of the local authority, but had a similar problem as me when it came to the certificates. So she enrolled for a secretarial course at Mohawk College in nearby Saltfleet, and no, learning how to shoot a bow and arrow was not in the curriculum. Her conscientious studying paid off, and my proud gal graduated with honors and immediately got a job as secretary to the general manager at a major preserve manufacturing company. During her 8 years at this plant, Rita completed a 3-year personnel management course at McMaster University in the evenings. Not an easy task for a 40-year-old. The company recognized this achievement and promoted her to personnel manager. Unfortunately, the plant closed down as a result of a corporate merger about 2 years later. Rita wasn't idle for long. She got a job at Odyssey Elevator in Hamilton as the benefits administrator. Meanwhile, things were moving along at Mother Met for me. At the risk of blowing my own trumpet, I had become quite a well-known successful salesman. One sometimes wonders why people do well in another country. The answer is quite simple. They usually work much harder than the indigenous people in order to prove themselves. This is what I did. Long hours and honesty will always pay off. I was in a meeting in Toronto when I was told that I had won a leaders conference 3-day trip to New York City, and I was asked to address the meeting regarding my achievement. Here we go again. I refused to stand up and speak, but I would answer questions. I should take a Dale Carnegie course to overcome this fear. When asked how I had done so much business in record time and won the trip, I stood up and replied, "Because I wanted to," and sat down. My second standing ovation followed. The New York trip was fantastic. I stayed at the famed Waldorf Astoria Hotel and had lots of free time to see the sights. It was recommended that I didn't walk the streets alone after dark for obvious reasons. Yet another challenge. I went to a bar one night, paid a fortune for a beer, and was returning to the hotel late when a hooker approached me. No, I didn't. I'm an innocent Lancashire lad. Instead, I asked her how she came to be in this trade. Honestly, I did. We chatted for about half an hour. What a story. Maybe I'm naive, but I believed her. Then we both heard a cop car siren, and my siren disappeared with what seemed to be a grateful see ya. These girls are human beings too, and I'm sure sometimes need a break. I attended a lecture in the Waldorf by an extremely well-known insurance salesman from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. This speaker was an ordained minister before entering the life insurance business where he made a fortune. A person in the audience asked him if he thought his religious background had contributed to his success. Joe explained that he had an arrangement with God and said, "God gets all the credit and I get all the commission. Please take that in the spirit in which it is given." I was in the elevator one day when a stranger spoke to me and said he had been following my career and was pleased to meet me at last. Seeing my puzzled look, he explained that he was from the MetLife Vancouver office, 3,000 miles away, and he'd seen my name on the big producers' bulletins. My head was getting bigger every day, but it was exciting and very encouraging. The one place we had to risk going into was the famous Tiffany's. Rita was in awe at the jewelry on display, and when we saw a lady examining a diamond-studded bracelet, we had to eavesdrop. "It's only $16,000, Mrs. R.B., said the salesman. The obviously wealthy customer pondered momentarily, then took out her checkbook and paid. I tried to usher Rita out of the place, as she was turning green with envy and already asking the price of a pair of earrings she admired. $400, marm. The damned things were the size of a pinhead. The clerk must have seen my jaw drop as he leaned over the counter and politely whispered to me, "The silver department is on the next floor, sir." I grinned and said, "Thank you. Do you by any chance have a wood department?" and walked away before he answered. On the second floor, Rita found the exact same earrings in silver and another pair she liked also. I lashed out and bought her both pairs for $43. Rita told me when we got outside that she really only wanted a Tiffany's carrier bag. I'd just blown all that money. One day, I received a disturbing telephone call from Rita. Sergeant Brown, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, had visited her at work. The RCMP investigate federal crimes such as telling lies on immigration documents. Poor Rita was dumbfounded and would only tell the plain-clothed policeman, apart from his brown boots, that she would only talk if I were present. He said he would come to our apartment that night. When he arrived, he asked me to leave the room. This kind of defeated the object of me being there, so we asked why. He hinted something about Rita's ex-husband. I explained that I knew all about him and asked what the problem was. The allegation was that Rita had bigamously married me. Explanation followed and that charge was dropped. He then read the other two charges. On the immigration documents, we had stated that we were married and had shown documents to prove it. The latter charge was also dismissed when we explained that we didn't have any papers proving marriage, only a change of name deed. We couldn't argue about claiming to be married, so he formally charged us, read us our rights, and took statements. You know the story about Rita and me, so I won't go into details about the statements. I could have murdered Rita at this point. She offered Brown Boots a cup of tea. That's what nice girls do, I suppose. The officer left, Rita cried, and we planned our defense. We hired a well-known solicitor, went to court, dressed like we just fell off a wedding cake, and pleaded guilty. A girl asked her female friend what a solicitor was. When she heard the reply, she said, "I wouldn't do that, but if I did, I certainly wouldn't charge for it." The judge was sympathetic to us. Our only crime was falling in love and trying to find a safe refuge in which to spend the rest of their lives together. Remember, I met Rita at the rifle club, and both Rita and her ex had rifles. On 2nd March 1972, we were fined $100 each, and the judge wished us well. That was a relief. We could have been deported. On 25th February 1975, we received a pardon from His Excellency, the Governor General in Council. The National Parole Board recommended it. Our criminal records were now sealed. Rita and I went on another free trip, courtesy of Metropolitan Life, 3 days at the posh Chateau Frontenac in Quebec City. We thoroughly enjoyed all the attractions and gourmet restaurants of this historical city before leaving for Hamilton the long way round. Heading for Boston, we traveled through the picturesque states of Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. We had chosen to go this way, both for the wonderful scenery and to visit the site of the Boston Tea Party. After circling a very busy roundabout in Boston, for 4 or 5 times we finally checked in a hotel, then headed for the docks. One of the 3 ships involved in the Tea Party had been well preserved and looked very stately, but also very crowded. Hang on a minute. Surely all these people hadn't suddenly decided to do the same as us. No, they hadn't. The Salada Tea Company had rented the ship for their annual employee get-together. What a bummer. All that way, and we couldn't get in. However, I love a challenge. Half an hour of pleasantries, intermingled with a few hints and jokes, got us an invite to the party on board, name tags, and all the food and drink we could consume. I felt bad as I only drink coffee. During the past few months, Rita had commenced divorce proceedings, from her previous husband, of course, and on the 19th December, 1974 received her decree absolute. We were married in Hamilton Family Court on 14th February, 1975. We had waited so long and gone through so much. Our wedding had to be on a special day. You can imagine how many people want to get married on Valentine's Day. But somehow I pulled it off. The wedding itself was a difficult event to organize. All our acquaintances had presumed we were married, so we didn't want to disturb this. Only Uncle Albert, the bad guy, and Rita's brother Joe, the good guy, attended the ceremony. Pity, really. We could have used some wedding gifts. Incidentally, I found out later that the evil uncle had already told all our friends about our situation in order to get revenge for throwing him out of our house for some other spiteful deed. Fortunately, our understanding friends he had told led us to enjoy our secret and never said a word. He even wrote a letter to my parents telling them all kinds of lies about Rita and me. They didn't believe him. In fact, I can hear my dad saying now, "Don't take any notice of the rantings of a maniac." My dad was very smart. It was unbelievable how a person could be so vindictive. This maniac had to be shut up for good. I weighed up my options and number one was to kill him, but concluded that this would have serious consequences, so I aimed at his Achilles heel, his wealth. I telephoned him and threatened that if I even heard his name mentioned again, he would die a poor maniac. He got scared and inquired in a trembling voice how in the world I could possibly bring this about. I firmly referred to the signed and dated letter containing the libelous lies and told him that I would not hesitate to take him to court for every penny he had if he did not disappear out of our lives. It worked, and we never saw or heard about him again until we read his obituary. I think it was just after our wedding that we went to see Rita's heart throb the late Frank Sinatra at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. Rita was ecstatic. The superstar walked onto the stage between two lines of armed guards to a deafening applause. He fooled around for a while so that his ardent fans could get their photographs. Rita was no different and asked me to get nearer the stage and take one. The minute I got to the stage and focused, etc., the bloody lights went dim and Frank started to sing. I was determined to carry out my wife's command and get a snap. In the meantime, two brick shithouses in suits had rushed over and grabbed me by the collar. I blurted out, "Just a moment, Frank. My wife wants a photograph." In the split second, when they were confused by my remark, I pointed my camera and clicked. Rita would be pleased. On the 8th of December 1975, we became Canadian citizens, and by now, we had more certificates than the public library. But it had all been worth the struggle. Canada is a wonderful place. Incidentally, if you ever think about immigrating, I would suggest you pursue the matter only if you feel you could live far away from your kinfolk. Most of the people who return home do so because of strong family ties. There are many situations when a face-to-face chat with ma'am or dad or whoever would be welcome, but when abroad, to a certain extent, you are on your own. It's not the same over the telephone. Anyway, I would strongly suggest that you think about this important aspect if immigration becomes an issue. We had made lots of friends, and this helped, but it's not the same as family. One of these friends was sadly diagnosed with terminal cancer. She was so young it seemed unfair, but she took the news like a trooper. Her husband, without hesitation, sold their house and possessions, packed a few belongings, and took his sick but still relatively strong wife into the backwoods to spend her last few months. Apparently, this is where she always wanted to retire. Just the two of them surrounded by nature. They built a small hut to live in and hunted and fished for food. This was idyllic for her, and she enjoyed life to the full until she passed away 4 months later. So sad. But I can't help feeling happy that she had realized her dream, albeit early, thanks to the admirable gesture of her adoring husband. The Lord works in mysterious ways. Our friend was taken from us, and another one came to replace her. On 19th June 1975, my brother and his wife became proud parents of their second child, Lisa. Future photographs and reports indicated that she was a gorgeous little girl with a somewhat placid temperament. I could write a book on this lovely girl, but suffice to say, she is now a young lady and married to Nigel. They now have a son, Liam, whom we hope to see in the not-too-distant future. I picked up Rita from work on a day that she'd struggled to get through. You know the type. I suggested we dine out, so off we went to the Royal Sheraton Hotel. I was flattered when I saw the huge crowd waving in the foyer, but they hadn't come to see us. We had entered through the side door at the same time as Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, nice initials, and his entourage came through the main entrance. Peering over the frantic crowd's heads, my eyes came into contact with those of the somewhat flamboyant and very popular statesman. I couldn't resist and blurted out, "What a haluva time to take my wife to dinner." He actually smiled, gave an understanding nod, and continued his fight through the admiring crowd. Sales can be a very rewarding career if you are successful, but exhausting. A conscientious salesperson will work long hours and be out in all weathers. In a climate like Canada, this can be a problem. Imagine going to your car only to find it enclosed completely in ice. In the eastern part of the country, it isn't unusual for the temperature to drop to minus 30 C. The snowfalls are something else. Makes driving very hazardous if you can get out of your driveway. So a salesperson's life is not always as glamorous as it may seem. Bearing this in mind, you will understand why I got cheesed off after spending 6 winters battling the elements in order to do my job. For the last 2 years, I had been studying and taking examinations for the designation Chartered Life Underwriter. The course was administered by Toronto University and included subjects such as psychology, accounting, and corporate finance. I graduated in 1976 and was as proud as punch when the mayor of Toronto presented me with my diploma. In addition to the work and studying, we bought and customized a new house in the suburbs of Hamilton. It was a 4-level backsplit. What the dickens is that, you say? As the name implies, the rooms are on 4 levels. That type of design is very practical and interesting, as there are maybe only 5 or 6 stairs between floors. We worked hard on making the new house our home. I told Rita I would try to make a stained glass window and asked her what design she fancied, bearing in mind I had never cut a piece of glass in my life. I expected her to pick something geometrical. Not my girl. She chose a tulip. 1 week and thousands of bits of wasted colored glass. Later, she got her wish. During our 9 years in Canada, Ma'am and Dad visited many times. They loved the place. With your permission, I would like to dwell for a short while on these enjoyable visits. In 1972, Ma'am and Dad, my brother and his wife, with their 2-year-old son, Paul, came for the first time. After the local sightseeing had been taken care of, we went on a car tour of Ontario. A trip to Ottawa to meet Rita's brother Joe and family was a must. Being so many of us, we had to find accommodation for 3 nights. This proved difficult, but after pleading with a local motor inn, the rooftop penthouse was placed at our disposal. Giving us a whimsical smile, they explained that seeing we needed it for weekdays only, it would be free of cheating executives and their mistresses, who only used it on the weekends. Apparently, this was the main use of this luxurious suite. Padded walls, beds all over the place, and a bar. How these people live. When we left Ottawa, we stayed at another posh motel by Lake Ontario. When the evening meal of roast beef was served, I asked the waitress for some gravy. The embarrassed lady returned to tell me the chef's angry reaction. "Gravy is not served with beef au juice." "It certainly is where I come from, so please oblige."